The clock on the wall does not tick. It bleeds seconds into a quiet, suffocating eternity. Outside the glass, the city moves with the restless, frantic choreography of an anthill disturbed by an invisible boot. But inside, in the dim sanctuary of a room heavy with unread letters and unfinished ledgers, a man sits motionless, staring at his own hands. They are capable hands, strong hands, calloused by decades of grasping, lifting, and building. Yet tonight they lie open and limp upon his knees, heavy as lead. He is not merely tired. To be tired is a physical grace, the clean, sweet exhaustion of a field hand who has watched the sun set over rows of furrowed earth, knowing the soil is turned and the work is done. This is something infinitely darker. This is soul exhaustion. It is the bone-deep fatigue of a creature that has spent its entire existence swimming upstream in a river with no source and no mouth, driven by the phantom terror that if it stops kicking for even a single heartbeat, it will sink to the bottom of oblivion. Every muscle aches with a chronic ambient tension. Every thought is a calculated strategy, a chess match played against an opponent who never reveals a face. He has plotted, he has schemed. He has engineered circumstances with the meticulous precision of a general preparing for a siege, convinced that if he just adds one more phone call, drafts one more strategy, or forces one more reluctant door to yield, the universe will finally bend to his sovereign will. And yet the door remains shut. Or worse, it opens only to reveal another corridor of identical doors, each demanding the same toll of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Observe him closely, for in his reflection, the modern world sees its own pale face. This is the paradox of human striving. The more violently one pushes against the machinery of existence, the more tightly the machinery locks against the intrusion. The universe is not a vault to be picked by crowbars of willpower. It is a mirror. And for years this man has been screaming at his own reflection, demanding that the glass smile first. To understand the mechanics of soul exhaustion, one must deconstruct the fundamental error of the striving ego. Why does a conscious being, endowed with imagination and the capacity for transcendent thought, willingly submit to a lifetime of relentless, grinding labor against reality? Why do we push against doors that are not locked? Because the ego operates from a profound foundational premise of separation. It perceives the world as an external, hostile fortress of scarce resources, where every good thing, love, wealth, peace, fulfillment, must be hunted, captured, and defended against rival predators. Consequently, the ego appoints itself as the supreme architect of reality. It assumes that nothing happens unless it forces it to happen. It believes that intention without brute force execution is merely daydreaming, and that the universe is an inert mass of clay that requires the constant, bleeding pressure of human hands to take any shape at all. How does this psychological mechanism manifest in daily behavior? It manifests as the chronic addiction to the how. The moment a desire arises, a luminous, beautiful impulse for a new life, a creative work, or a profound healing, the ego immediately hijacks the process. It does not pause to revere the birth of the desire. It reaches for a weaponized checklist. It calculates odds, maps human terrains, and begins the exhausting architecture of manipulation. It reasons, if I am to have this, I must charm X, bypass Y, outwork Z, and sacrifice my sleep, my peace, and my presence. This is where the psychological fracture occurs. By taking absolute ownership of the mechanics of manifestation, the individual commits a catastrophic confusion of roles. They attempt to be simultaneously the dreamer who conceives the vision and the stonemason who manually quarries every physical atom required for its construction. Philosophically, this is a denial of the infinite intelligence that sustains the cosmos. It is the equivalent of a cell in the human body panicking, deciding that the heart has forgotten how to beat, and attempting to pump the entire vascular system through sheer muscular spasms of its own microscopic walls. The result of this usurpation is not success, it is systemic collapse. The soul grows weary because it is attempting a task for which it was never structurally designed. It was designed to experience and to choose. It was never designed to hold the weight of worlds upon shoulders meant only for the light touch of grace. In the annals of maritime history, there is the haunting legend of the Ethelgard, a magnificent three-masted schooner caught in the doldrums off the western coast of Africa. For weeks, the ocean lay flat as a pewter plate, unruffled by a single breath of wind. The sails hung limp and useless against the towering masts. Aboard the vessel was a master navigator named Julian, a man renowned throughout the ports of Lisbon and London for his mathematical brilliance and iron will. As the days melted into weeks and the ship's fresh water dwindled, the crew grew restless, casting fearful glances toward the blinding horizon. Panic whispered through the rigging. Julian refused to yield to despair. Convinced that the ship's salvation lay entirely in his own hands, he devised a desperate plan. He ordered the crew to drop the heavy longboats into the water. He commanded 20 men to take up the long oars, loop thick hemp ropes around the massive iron cleats of the schooner, and begin rowing. Day after day, under a sun that baked the pitch from the deck planks, the men rowed. Their hands blistered, split, and soaked the wooden oars in blood. Julian stood at the helm, shouting encouragements, calculating coordinates, driving them harder with every mile of stagnant water they supposedly gained. When men collapsed from heat stroke, others took their places. The physical toll was unimaginable. They were dragging a 1,000-ton vessel across an infinite ocean with muscle and bone alone. At night, Julian sat in his cabin by the flickering light of an oil lamp, poring over charts, drafting new rowing shifts, entirely consumed by the terror that if he slept, the ship would drift backward into doom. He was exhausted beyond description, his eyes hollow, his spirit brittle, his mind a labyrinth of frantic calculations. On the 40th day of this agonizing ordeal, Julian collapsed on the quarterdeck, his heart hammering an erratic, dangerous rhythm against his ribs. The exhausted crew stopped rowing, letting the oars slide into the water with a soft, defeated splash. They prepared to die. They were too tired to weep, too hollowed out to pray. And then, in the stillness of the afternoon, something shifted. A faint, cool breath brushed against Julian's damp cheek. It was a whisper from the west. Then another. The limp canvas overhead stirred, emitting a low, hollow shudder like a waking giant stretching its limbs. Across the water, a dark line of ripples began to race toward them, a great, sweeping offshore trade wind, born from the deep atmospheric currents of the continent, moving with a power that no human arm could ever generate or command. Julian, lying flat on the bleached deck, looked up with tear-blurred eyes. The wind caught the main topsail. The canvas ballooned outward with a sound like a thunderclap. The heavy hull of the Ethelgard groaned, lifted, and surged forward. Without a single man touching an oar, without a single drop of human blood staining the deck, the ship leaped across the waves, propelled by an invisible, inexhaustible force that had been waiting just beyond the horizon the entire time. Julian wept not from the relief of survival, but from the crushing realization of his own folly. For 40 days he had broken his men, destroyed his body, and lived in a hell of his own making, all because he did not know how to wait for the wind. The story of the Ethelgard is not a maritime relic. It is the exact biography of your own striving. Examine your life today. Where are you currently pulling at the oars of a stationary ship, convinced that if you release your grip for even a second, you will drown? Where are your hands bleeding from forcing doors that were never meant to be broken, while the great invisible trade winds of consciousness hover just outside your awareness, waiting for you to simply hoist your sails and let go? You do not need another strategy. You do not need to layer yet another complex architecture of hustle upon the exhausted foundation of your current life. What you require is a cessation of hostilities against the self and the universe. Take a moment right now. Unclench your jaw. Drop your shoulders away from your ears. Feel the weight of your hands resting wherever they lie. Recognize that the bone-deep fatigue you carry is the direct result of playing a role that does not belong to you. Before you turn the page, let this truth settle into the quiet spaces between your thoughts. You were never meant to build the bridge with your bare hands. If this realization brings a sudden aching wave of relief to your chest, pause here. Take a breath and let the unnecessary weight fall away. If this sanctuary of thought has offered you even a moment of peace, consider subscribing to ensure you do not miss the path forward. As you step across this threshold, the air changes. The frantic noise of the harbor fades behind us. Ahead lies a deeper mystery, the silent, luminous moment when a desire first forms within you, not as a burden to be hunted down, but as a sacred fingerprint left behind by destiny itself. Turn the page, and let us discover what lives in the quiet spaces where the true creation begins. There is a precise, breathless moment in the dead of winter when the house is entirely still, save for the low, rhythmic thrum of the radiator and the faint scratching of frost upon the window pane. In this immaculate quiet, a mind drifting in the borderland between waking and sleeping is suddenly pierced by a beam of light. It is a desire. Not a casual whim, not the passing greed for a shiny trinket or the petty envy of a neighbor's fortune, but something luminous, terrifying, and whole. It arrives unbidden, a vision of a life not yet lived, a reconciliation that seemed impossible, a creative work that demands to be born from silence, a healing that washes over old scars like spring rain over dry soil, or a sum of freedom that feels as vast as an open ocean. Observe the immediate reaction of the person experiencing this visitation. A sharp gasp catches in their throat. Their eyes fly open in the dark. For one exquisite second, they feel electrified, elevated, touched by a royalty that belongs to the gods. But almost instantly, like a cold fog rolling over a warm hearth, a heavy domestic terror settles in. The ego rushes forward with its wet blankets of reality, whispering, "Who are you to dream this? Where is the money? Where is the time? Look at your history. Look at your failures." The desire itself, so pure, so biologically and spiritually integrated, feels suddenly like a cruel joke played by a capricious universe upon a fragile creature. Yet, what the terrified mind fails to perceive in that split second of panic is that the desire did not land in their consciousness by accident. It did not drift in from someone else's destiny. It wears a specific, undeniable signature. It is the fingerprint of destiny itself, pressing its indelible ink upon the page of a human soul, declaring that what has been conceived in the imagination is already encoded in the very structure of reality. To comprehend the origin of a true desire, one must abandon the pedestrian view that human wants are random biological glitches or desperate compensations for childhood wounds. We must journey into the deeper philosophy of consciousness and ask a fundamental question. Why does a desire arise in the human heart at all? Because creation is teleological. It moves outward from an infinite center toward expression. A desire is not an external object waiting out in the cold world to be captured by a hunter. It is an internal pattern seeking externalization. Consciousness, infinite and inexhaustible, constantly desires to experience new facets of its own limitless nature. It cannot experience them directly in the formless abyss of the Absolute, so it individualizes itself as you. How does this cosmic impulse translate into a personal, localized longing? The moment an aspiration forms within your awareness, whether it is a profound artistic masterpiece, a liberated career, or a deep, soulful partnership, that longing is the universe using your localized lens to look at a new horizon. It would be an ontological impossibility for you to genuinely conceive of a state, to feel its texture, to taste its reality in your imagination, if that state did not already exist as a potentiality in the infinite matrix of being. The ego, trapped in linear time, looks at the gap between the current moment and the imagined future and panics. It assumes that because the physical eyes do not see the manifestation, the desire must be manufactured from nothing by sweat and tears. But the metaphysics of reality operate in reverse. The physical world is not the creator of reality, it is the shadow cast by reality. Why must this truth be engraved upon the understanding? Because when you realize that the desire itself is the guarantee of its fulfillment, the entire paradigm of striving collapses. You no longer look at your dream as a distant mountain peak that you must scale with bleeding fingers. You recognize it as an invitation. The Creator does not mock its instruments. A musician does not hear a symphony in their head that the universe forbids them to play. The symphony plays in them because the instruments of the cosmos are already tuned to its frequency. To deny your deep, authentic desire out of false humility or realistic caution is not wisdom. It is an act of cosmic treason against the very intelligence that gave you breath. In the spring of 1843, a quiet, unassuming man named Elias Howe sat in the cramped attic of his home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, staring at a blank wall with a mind tormented by an invisible obsession. For years, the textile industry had begged for a mechanical solution to hand sewing, but every inventor who attempted to build a sewing machine failed at the exact same hurdle: how to pass a thread through a moving needle without the stitch bunching or tangling into a hopeless knot. Howe had spent 5 agonizing years trying to force the solution. He sketched designs by the hundreds. He machined tiny metal components with jeweler's precision. He worked 16-hour days until his health broke, coughing blood into his handkerchief, his eyes hollowed out by chronic exhaustion. He was treating the problem like a mechanical puzzle to be solved through brute force trial and error. One night, utterly spent, Howe fell into a feverish sleep in his chair. In the deep, silent hours, his subconscious mind constructed a vivid, terrifying dream. He dreamed he had been captured by a savage tribe of cannibals in a distant, exotic jungle. The tribal king, towering and merciless, stood over him with a raised spear, giving him exactly 24 hours to invent a working sewing machine that could stitch fabric at speed, or face execution by being run through with spears crafted with hollow tips. Howe woke in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs, convinced he was a dead man. But as the terror receded, a strange clarity took its place. He realized that in the frantic panic of his dream, his mind had replayed the exact flaw of his waking designs. He had been trying to put the eye of the needle at the top, just like a traditional hand-sewing needle. In a flash of blinding insight, a visitation from the deep sovereign intelligence within the true design was revealed to him. The eye of the needle did not belong at the top. It belonged at the point. Howe rushed to his workbench before dawn, picked up a piece of metal, and within hours carved a needle with the eye near the tip. The machine worked instantly, flawlessly, performing stitches that no human hand could match. He had not found the answer by pushing harder against his old strategies. The answer had bypassed his frantic conscious mind entirely, dropping like a ripe fruit from the tree of imagination because he had finally stopped interfering with the design. Look back at the unfulfilled longing that has been haunting the margins of your life. That persistent whisper, that recurring dream of what you might become, what you might create, or how you might live. Do not dismiss it as a fantasy. Do not filter it through the small, frightened accounting of your current bank account, your age, or your past mistakes. The very fact that the desire feels so native to your heart, so luminous and alive when you dare to touch it in your quietest moments, is the absolute proof that it belongs to you. It is your destiny speaking in the vernacular of your imagination. Take a deep breath and let this realization anchor in your bones. The desire would not have arisen in you if it were not already meant for you. If a forgotten dream has just flared back to life in your chest, pause. Honor that spark. If these words have helped you recognize the sacred origin of your deepest aspirations, take a moment to hit the like button and share this journey with others who need to hear it. As we leave the genesis of desire behind, we must confront the immediate trap that destroys most human potential. The moment a dream appears, the ego reaches for the blueprint, eager to take control of the construction site. Turn the page, and let us expose the catastrophic confusion of roles that turns divine blueprints into prison cells. The ink on the fresh page is still wet, reflecting the harsh glare of a single brass desk lamp. Outside, the night is velvet black, heavy with the stillness that precedes the dawn. A woman sits hunched over a sprawling map of human connections, financial ledgers, and color-coded timelines. Her fingers tremble slightly, not from cold, but from the electric, feverish intensity of a design just born in her imagination. She has a dream, a magnificent architecture of possibility, and she has decided that she is going to force it into existence by sheer, unyielding willpower. Watch the ritual of the modern architect of fate. The moment the inspiration struck her hours ago, she did not pause to revere it. She reached for a pen as though drawing a sword. She began to map the terrain of human resistance. Who knows whom? Which corporate door might crack open if she drops the right name? Which combination of charm, flattery, relentless follow-up calls, and agonizing schedule shuffling might yield the exact outcome she demands from the universe? She constructs an elaborate, labyrinthine blueprint in her mind, convincing herself that if she builds the scaffolding tall enough and pushes hard enough, The invisible world will have no choice but to rearrange itself according to her conscious plan. And then the friction begins. She pushes through rejection like a battering ram against oak. She pushes through bone-weary fatigue, silencing the body's natural protests with caffeine and cold resolve. When an email goes unanswered, she drafts a sharper one. When a meeting is cancelled, she crashes the lobby uninvited. She repeats the same exhausting maneuvers with doubled intensity, operating under the catastrophic illusion that if the door will not open, the problem is merely the quantity of her muscle power. Yet, as the clock ticks toward 3 in the morning, a hollow victory or a bitter defeat stares back at her from the page. Either nothing has moved an inch and she collapses into self-loathing, or something has forced its way into reality, but it arrives misshapen, cold, and stained with the exact anxiety that birthed it. It tastes like ash. Why? Because she has usurped a throne that was never hers to sit upon. To diagnose this systemic failure, we must examine the precise mechanics of the psychological usurpation that occurs the moment an aspiration enters the human field of awareness. Why does the conscious mind immediately assume the burden of total physical orchestration? Because the ego is fundamentally an instrument of survival, shaped by millions of years of evolutionary scarcity. In the physical domain, if a creature does not hunt, it starves. If it does not build a physical shelter, it freezes. The ego applies this crude biological survival template to the realm of consciousness. It treats the infinite field of potential as a dangerous wilderness where nothing is provided and where every desired manifestation must be trapped, slaughtered, and dragged home by the hair. How does this manifest as a catastrophic confusion of roles? It manifests when the individual appoints themselves as both the dreamer, the sacred vessel through which the vision is conceived, and the master mason, the laborer who must physically hammer every single brick into place. Why is this a fatal error in the architecture of reality? Because the conscious mind, with its linear, three-dimensional processing capacity, is hopelessly unequipped to manage the infinite variables required to manifest a complex reality. The conscious mind knows only what it has experienced, remembers only what it has been taught, and sees only the immediate local environment. When it attempts to orchestrate the how, it is like a blindfolded chess player trying to move pieces across a 10,000-dimensional board. It calculates 2 steps ahead while the infinite intelligence of the universe is calculating 10 million steps ahead. When you demand to know how your desire will manifest, who will bring it to you, when it will arrive, and what precise steps will bridge the gap, you are telling the infinite intelligence, step aside, I do not trust you. I will build this cathedral myself out of mud and spit. Consciousness, which is infinite patient and infinitely respectful of your free will, steps back. It watches the exhausting, pathetic performance of your striving and waits. It waits for you to burn through your finite fuel supply, to shatter your nervous system against the walls of circumstance, and to finally understand that you were never meant to be the stonemason of your destiny. You are the canvas. You are the clearing through which the miracle flows. When you confuse the roles, you turn the divine symphony of creation into a grueling Sisyphean punishment. In the annals of Renaissance architecture, there is the enduring account of Master Giovanni, who was commissioned in the late 15th century to design and oversee the construction of the Cathedral of San Lorenzo in Florence. Giovanni was a master of proportion, a genius whose sketches left patrons breathless, but he was also a man consumed by an agonizing, pathological need for total control. As the foundation stones were laid, Giovanni refused to delegate the placement of a single block. He stood in the dust and mortar from dawn until dusk, screaming instructions, snatching the trowel from the hands of master stonemasons, and personally inspecting every load of limestone that arrived from the quarries of Carrara. If a block of marble had a hairline fracture that only his magnifying glass could detect, he rejected the entire cartload, forcing the drivers to turn back and delaying construction by weeks. He slept on a cot beneath the half-built arches, his mind racing, drafting backup plans for the backup plans. He was convinced that if he looked away for a single hour, the pillars would buckle and the vaulted ceilings would collapse into ruin. By the second year, the cathedral site looked less like a sacred sanctuary and more like a penal colony. The master craftsmen, demoralized and exhausted by his incessant micromanagement, laid down their tools and walked off the job in disgust. The patrons threatened to revoke his commission. Giovanni's hair turned stark white, his body withered to skin and bone, and his vision grew dim from lack of sleep. Yet he stood alone in the empty, echoing nave, trying to lift a 200-pound archstone with his own bleeding, trembling hands, weeping in frustration as it slipped and cracked against the flagstones. At that moment of total collapse, an old Franciscan friar, visiting the ruins of the project, walked calmly through the heavy oak doors. He found Giovanni lying face down in the dirt beside the broken stone, defeated and dying of exhaustion. The friar knelt, placed a gentle hand upon the architect's shaking shoulder, and spoke with a quiet authority that cut through the delirium of the man's despair. "Master Giovanni, you were hired to envision the glory of God in stone, not to carry the mountain upon your back. You have insulted the quarry by treating it like an enemy, and you have insulted your workers by treating them like slaves to your anxiety. Step back. Let the stone be cut by those whose hands are rested. Let the mortar cure in its own sacred time. Design the vision with your soul, and let the house build itself around your faith." Giovanni, broken of his delusions, surrendered the keys of the site to the senior craftsman and collapsed into a 3-day sleep. When he awoke, he looked upon the worksite with new eyes. He drew the grand elevations, handed them to the masters, and walked away from the daily mechanics of the yard. To his astonishment, freed from his frantic interference, the workmen organized with an organic, breathtaking efficiency. Materials arrived precisely when needed. Artisans carved details far more exquisite than Giovanni's frantic mind could have ever mandated. Within 3 years, the Cathedral of San Lorenzo rose toward the Tuscan sky like a living prayer built not by the blood and panic of a tyrant, but by the effortless synchronization of many hands, moving in harmony with a single, clear vision. It is time to look at your own blueprints, examine the frantic schedules, the forced networking, the sleepless nights of tactical plotting that define your current pursuit of success. Where are you acting as Master Giovanni in the cathedral of your life, personally hauling stones that were meant to be delivered by the invisible currents of the universe? Take a deep breath and let the realization wash over your consciousness. The moment you take total ownership of the how, you exile the infinite intelligence from your process. Drop the trowel, step away from the scaffolding of forced manipulation. Acknowledge that your conscious mind does not possess the geographic range, the temporal vision, or the mechanical power to orchestrate the thousands of unseen variables required for your expansion. As you release the illusion of control, the air in the room clears. The frantic chatter of the ego subsides, leaving behind a profound, expectant silence. You are no longer the desperate architect of a collapsing building. You are the silent, sovereign dreamer whose vision is already taking root in the fertile soil of the unseen. Turn the page. Ahead lies the foundational secret of reality creation, the discovery that your effort does not create your world, but your assumption does. Step forward into the mechanics of true power. The studio is quiet, lit only by the amber slant of a late autumn sun piercing through dust motes suspended in the heavy air. Before the easel stands a young painter, staring at a blank, stretched canvas of pristine white linen. For 6 grueling hours, she has attacked that surface with charcoal and heavy oils, layering thick, overworked strokes of crimson and leaden gray, trying to physically force a masterpiece into being through sheer kinetic violence. Her knuckles are smeared with pigment. Her breath comes in shallow, ragged gasps. The canvas does not look like art. It looks like a battlefield where a desperate war has been lost. Step closer to her and observe the fundamental contradiction of her labor. She believes that the physical canvas is the place where creation happens. She believes that every stroke of the brush, every drop of sweat, every ounce of muscular tension is the direct cause of the beauty she hopes to see. Yet, the canvas is entirely passive. It possesses no will, no creative spark, no independent agenda. It simply reflects with brutal fidelity the state of the mind that approaches it. The paradox of human existence mirrors this painter's studio. We spend our lives covered in the soot of endless labor, redoubling our efforts when our circumstances do not yield, assuming that the physical world is the master forge, where reality is beaten into shape with the hammer of hard work. We push, we strain, we hustle, we manipulate every physical lever within reach, convinced that if we just push harder, sweat more, and sacrifice deeper, the universe will finally hand over its treasures. And all the while, the infinite intelligence of the universe watches this frantic performance with quiet compassion, waiting for the realization of a shattering, liberating truth. Your effort does not create. Your assumption creates. To grasp the mechanics of reality creation, one must undergo a profound cognitive revolution, shifting from the visible domain of effects to the invisible domain of causes. Why does human effort consistently fail to produce true fulfillment, even when it achieves outward success? Because effort is an effect, not a cause. When an individual strives from a state of lack, working furiously because they are terrified of poverty, networking aggressively because they feel invisible, or pursuing a relationship because they are drowning in loneliness, every action they take is saturated with the psychological vibration of absence. The universe does not respond to the physical motion of your hands, it responds to the internal posture of your consciousness. How does the law of assumption operate beneath the threshold of physical perception? Assumption is not mere positive thinking, nor is it a polite hope or a wishful prayer tossed upward toward a distant sky. Assumption is the psychological act of accepting a state as already real, living, and present tense in consciousness. When you genuinely assume the state of your wish fulfilled, your entire internal psychology reorganizes itself. Your language changes, your posture shifts, your emotional baseline stabilizes, and the invisible electromagnetic and psychological field you project into the world alters completely. Why must this state be inhabited as a present reality rather than a future goal? Because consciousness knows only the eternal now. If you project your desire into a perpetual future, saying, "I will be successful, I will find love," or "I hope this comes to pass," you are psychologically anchoring yourself in the state of not yet. Consciousness, being an obedient mirror, takes that instruction and diligently maintains the distance between you and your desire, ensuring that it remains forever just out of reach. To assume the end is to collapse that distance entirely. It is to step across the threshold of time in your imagination and inhabit the feeling reality of the person who already possesses what you seek. When you occupy that state, the external world has no choice, eventually, but to conform to it. Circumstances begin to rearrange, people move toward you with unexpected offers, and the physical events required for your manifestation begin to crystallize from what appeared to be empty air. This is not magic, it is the precise, mechanical operation of consciousness, shaping physical reality from the inside out. In the winter of 1908, in a dilapidated loft in downtown Paris, a struggling young sculptor named Constantine was on the verge of abandoning his art altogether. For nearly a decade, he had labored like a galley slave, carving massive blocks of marble into conventional, highly detailed neoclassical figures that he hoped would win the approval of the Paris Salon. He worked 16-hour days until his hands were permanently stiffened with arthritis, his eyes strained by poor candlelight, his lungs scarred by stone dust. Yet, year after year, his submissions were rejected, his rent went unpaid, and his spirit hollowed out into a gray husk of despair. He was treating sculpture as a war of attrition against stubborn rock. One freezing evening, utterly broken and penniless, Constantine was visited by an eccentric old master carver who had watched the young man's agonizing decline. The master walked into the frigid studio, looked at the overworked, hyper-detailed marble statues littered about the floor, and shook his head. "Constantine," the old master said, his voice cutting through the silence of the room, "you are sweating to carve a cage for a bird that is already flying free. You are trying to force the stone to become something it is not, because you are carving from the terror of a man who has nothing. You must stop fighting the material." Constantine, bewildered and angry, asked, "How else is a statue made if not by hammer, chisel, and endless sweat?" The master smiled, walked over to a fresh, uncarved block of gray limestone in the corner, placed his bare palm flat against its rough surface, and closed his eyes. He stood there in absolute stillness for 5 full minutes, breathing slowly, his face relaxing into an expression of profound, unshakable serenity. When the master opened his eyes, he turned to Constantine and whispered, "The statue is already inside the stone. It has always been there, complete, breathing, and perfect. Your chisel does not create the form. Your chisel merely chips away the illusion that the stone is anything other than what it already is. Stop working to create the future. Assume the perfection of the form right now, and let your hands simply follow what your mind has already claimed. That night, Constantin did not pick up a chisel. Instead, he sat in the dark of his studio and did something he had never done before. He closed his eyes and viscerally inhabited the state of a man whose work was already celebrated, whose hands moved with effortless grace, whose life was already abundant and secure. He did not hope for it. He felt its reality with every fiber of his being until the future dissolved into an overwhelming sense of memory as though it had already happened. When the sun rose, he picked up his mallet, but the frenzy was gone. His movements were calm, fluid, and utterly devoid of anxiety. The stone seemed to yield beneath his blade not with resistance, but with a joyful surrender, as if it had been waiting for him to wake up. Within weeks, he carved the Kissa masterpiece that broke away from all traditional academic constraints and launched a revolution in modern sculpture. He had not changed his environment, he had changed his assumption, and the world had rearranged itself around the shift. It is time to bring this profound truth down from the realm of philosophy and anchor it in the soil of your immediate reality. Think of the single desire that has been burning in your heart throughout this journey, the career breakthrough, the healing, the creative work, or the life you know you were born to live. Up until this moment, how have you approached it? Like Constantine in his early days, with clenched fists, forced strategies, and the exhausting desperation of someone trying to build a reality out of nothing. Right now, in this quiet moment, drop the chisel, take a deep breath, and deliberately shift your internal posture. Stop hoping for your desire. Stop reaching toward it as if it were on a high shelf you cannot quite touch. Close your eyes in your imagination and step directly into the reality of already having it. Give it the sensory texture of lived experience. What does the room look like? Who is standing beside you? How does your body feel, free of the chronic tension of lack? Remain in that state until it takes on the tones of reality, until it feels less like a comforting fantasy and more like a memory of something that has already occurred. Your assumption is the only law of creation. If this realization has shifted the weight of the world off your shoulders, pause right here. Let the relief settle deep into your chest. If this guidance has brought clarity to your path, consider subscribing to continue walking this journey of conscious mastery. As you step out of this chapter, a new horizon opens before you. We have dismantled the illusion of effort and established the supremacy of assumption. But who is the silent, infinite power that receives this assumption and weaves it into the fabric of the universe? Turn the page and let us meet the infinite guide within. The mountain trail winds upward through a dense primeval forest where the pine needles form a thick amber carpet that muffles the sound of footsteps. Above the canopy, twilight is bleeding deep violet and indigo across the western sky, painting the craggy peaks in shades of ancient blood and ash. A traveler stands at a jagged crossroads where three distinct paths vanish into the darkening thickets. He holds a crumpled, grease-stained paper map in one hand and a sputtering iron lantern in the other. He is entirely hopelessly lost. For 3 hours he has trusted his own navigation, marched down blind alleys, scaled treacherous scree slopes, and doubled back on his own tracks. Now, the oil in his lantern is running dry, the temperature is plunging toward freezing, and the forest is alive with the low, shifting rustles of nocturnal predators. Yet, step closer to him and observe the most astonishing detail of his predicament. Standing just 10 paces away, leaning calmly against the smooth trunk of an ancient silver birch, is a seasoned mountain guide. The guide wears no heavy pack, his hands are empty, his breathing is slow and effortless, and his eyes reflect the gathering dark with absolute, unshakable serenity. He knows every hidden spring, every impassable ravine, and every safe clearing on this mountain, having walked its paths 10,000 times. And what does the traveler do? He does not turn to the guide. Instead, he turns his back on him, leans closer to his dying lantern, squints fiercely at his inaccurate map, and begins shouting into the gloom, demanding that the wilderness yield to his own calculations. He curses the darkness, blames the weather, and frantically insists on forging ahead along a path that leads straight to a sheer precipice. This is the exact, tragic portrait of human consciousness in relation to Source. We wander through the unmapped wilderness of our lives, clutching the fragile maps of our anxieties, while the greatest intelligence in the universe waits silently by our side, ready to lead us home if we would only stop running and surrender the helm. To understand the nature of this internal guide, we must shatter the religious and psychological conditioning that has taught humanity to look for God, power, or wisdom outside of itself. What is Source, and where does its immense intelligence reside? Source is not an anthropomorphic entity sitting upon a distant throne in the clouds, weighing human worthiness, doling out favors based on moral compliance, or keeping ledger books of sin and virtue. Source is consciousness itself. It is the infinite, inexhaustible intelligence that operates as the bedrock of all reality. It is the pure, unconditioned I am, the vast, sovereign awareness that existed before you had a name, before your body took form, and before the stars were lit in the firmament. How does this universal intelligence operate within the localized vessel of an individual human life? It operates as the subconscious creative power. While the conscious mind is busy worrying, planning, strategizing, and sweating over local details, the deeper I am is quietly sustaining the beating of your heart, the replication of your cells, the atmospheric pressure of your lungs, and the orchestration of 10,000 invisible variables across space and time. It is the intelligence that knows how to turn a silent, dark seed into a towering oak tree without a single university degree or architectural blueprint. Why does this infinite intelligence remain dormant or blocked in the average human experience? Because of the ego's pathological insistence on self-management, the ego, terrified of losing its illusory control, demands to be the commander-in-chief of existence. It invites intelligence to lead, but immediately overrides every intuitive nudge, every quiet whisper, and every synchronized opportunity, acting as though everything depends exclusively upon its own frantic muscle power. When you declare your faith in consciousness while simultaneously treating your life like a solo survival mission, you create an internal civil war. Source cannot guide a mind that is screaming orders at the universe. The infinite intelligence possesses a breathtaking, microscopic precision that your limited understanding cannot even fathom. It can arrange circumstances from directions you cannot see and distances you cannot measure. But it has one absolute, inviolable condition. It cannot lead you when you insist on leading yourself. In the winter of 1855, during the height of the Crimean War, a British supply caravan carrying winter clothing, medical supplies, and fresh rations for thousands of freezing soldiers became hopelessly lost in the treacherous, snow-choked passes of the Balaclava Mountains. A blinding blizzard had wiped out all visible landmarks, burying the roads beneath 10 feet of white drifts. The commanding officer in charge of the detachment was a proud, meticulous colonel named Vance, a man who prided himself on his tactical maps and his absolute refusal to rely on anyone else. Convinced that he knew the geography better than the local nomadic herdsmen who offered their assistance, Colonel Vance ordered his men to hitch extra horses to the heavy wagons and plow straight through a narrow, unmapped mountain gorge. The local guides warned him urgently, "Colonel, the gorge is a death trap. The wind shears off the upper cliffs, and the snow is packed into bottomless sinkholes. Turn back and follow the low valley trail." Vance sneered at them, calling them superstitious peasants, and forced his weary, freezing men into the gorge at sword point. For 2 days they battered their way through howling gales. Horses collapsed in their harnesses, wagons splintered against hidden boulders, men froze to death standing up, their uniforms stiffened into suits of blue ice. Vance marched at the front, clutching his map, shouting encouragements through bleeding lips, determined to conquer the mountain by sheer willpower. On the third night, trapped in an absolute whiteout beneath an overhanging cliff, half his men dead or incapacitated, the colonel finally collapsed into the snow, his spirit shattered, his lungs filling with fluid. In his delirium, he realized that his maps were useless, his strategies were garbage, and his arrogance had murdered his soldiers. As the colonel lay dying in the drift, an old Tartar guide whom Vance had dismissed days earlier walked quietly out of the swirling snowstorm. He did not scold the fallen officer. He simply knelt beside him, wrapped a warm woolen blanket over his shoulders, lifted him onto his own horse, and whispered in a calm, steady voice, "You have fought the mountain long enough, little brother. Close your eyes and trust the horse. The animal knows the way home." Vance, too weak to resist, surrendered. He closed his eyes, let go of the reins, and slumped against the saddle. The horse did not march back into the deadly gorge. It turned calmly around, stepped gingerly through a hidden gap in the rocks that no map recorded, and walked down a protected, winding ledge where the wind died to a gentle sigh. Within 2 hours, they reached a warm, hidden valley where shelter, food, and salvation awaited. Vance survived, but his pride was dead. He learned the greatest lesson a human soul can absorb. The journey is impossible when you fight the guide who knows the path. It is time to examine your own wanderings through the blizzard of modern life. Where are you currently rejecting the silent, knowing guide within in favor of your own frantic, map-clutching survival strategies? Where are you marching into the gorge of forced effort because you cannot silence the part of your ego that whispers, "I know better, I must be in control"? Take a deep breath right now, drop the map. Acknowledge that the intelligence which constructed the galaxies, which beats your heart without your conscious permission, and which breathes life into your lungs is infinitely more capable of arranging your life than your anxious, overcoating ego. If this realization brings a deep, settling wave of peace to your spirit, pause here. Let go of the steering wheel of your life. If this sanctuary of thought has illuminated the presence of the infinite within you, consider hitting the like button to support this work and ensure you never miss a step on the path. As you release your grip on the reins, the forest begins to quiet. The howling wind of striving drops to a whisper. Ahead lies the mysterious, alchemical transformation of action itself, the discovery of how to move through the world not by pushing the river, but by being carried by its current. Turn the page and let us step into the alchemy of inspired action. The rain beats a frantic tattoo-like rhythm against the tall, arched windows of a downtown office tower. Inside, under the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, a young professional sits at a mahogany desk buried beneath a mountain of paperwork, cold coffee cups, and half-drafted proposals. It is past midnight. His eyes are bloodshot. His fingers twitch over a keyboard, and his chest feels tight with a corrosive, metallic anxiety. For 16 hours today, he has been executing what he calls hustle-placing cold calls from a list of strangers who do not want to talk to him, firing off frantic job applications into digital black holes, and networking with a feverish, hollow efficiency that smells of desperation. Observe the energy radiating from his posture. Every keystroke is violent. Every breath is a sigh of burden. He is operating under the cultural dogma that if he stops moving for even 5 minutes, his entire life will collapse into ruin. Yet, step back and observe the profound, agonizing paradox of his labor. The harder he pushes, the further away his goals seem to drift. The emails he sends are ignored. The contacts he chases treat him with polite indifference. He is sweating, bleeding, and burning through his vital life force, yet he is standing entirely still in a swamp of his own anxiety. Contrast this with the rare, luminous moments in human experience when action feels entirely different, when a person moves not with the frantic strain of a prisoner breaking rocks, but with the joyful, effortless velocity of a hawk riding a thermal current. Why do two people take physical action, yet one experiences total depletion while the other experiences effortless expansion? The answer lies in the alchemical secret that separates forced action from inspired action. To master the mechanics of manifestation without falling into the trap of passivity or burnout, one must rigorously deconstruct the philosophy of human movement. Does the law of assumption require absolute stillness, or is movement woven into the fabric of creation? Movement is woven into the very nature of existence. Life is dynamic, flowing, and expressive. The law of assumption does not teach paralysis, nor does it invite you to sit in an armchair and wait for the physical world to reorganize itself around your physical stillness. The error lies not in taking action, but in the state of consciousness from which that action originates. Why do actions born from forced effort invariably amplify the exact conditions they are trying to escape? Because every action carries a vibrational frequency encoded with the psychological state of the person performing it. When an individual takes action from the consciousness of lack, working desperately because they believe they are poor, applying anxiously because they believe they are unemployed, or speaking with desperate flattery because they believe they are unloved every word, Every phone call and every step broadcasts the signature of absence. The universe is an acoustic chamber of resonance. It does not respond to the desperate grammar of your pleas. It responds to the underlying song of your state. Actions taken from desperation act as repellent forces, deepening the very condition of lack they seek to cure. How does inspired action fundamentally alter this dynamic? Inspired action is born from the state of the wish fulfilled. When you have genuinely assumed the reality of your desire in consciousness, your internal landscape transforms from scarcity to abundance. From that elevated plateau of certainty, something remarkable occurs. You become naturally guided. Ideas do not need to be manufactured through late-night panic. They arise with a crystal clarity that feels less like thinking and more like receiving. Impulses tug at your awareness, an unexpected urge to call a forgotten acquaintance, a sudden pull to visit a place you have no logical reason to frequent, or a quiet, persistent knowing that surfaces at dawn. These are not random accidents. These are the whispers of Source, laying down the first threads of the bridge of incidents. When you act from this place, the action is light, precise, and electric with energy. You are no longer pushing the river, you are moving with it. In the spring of 1921, a brilliant young architect in Vienna named Victor found himself trapped in a professional purgatory. For 2 years, he had been trying to secure a municipal commission to design the city's new public library. He had utilized every conventional strategy known to man. He bribed minor officials with lavish dinners, submitted endless portfolios to municipal committees, and networked with the fierce, exhausting intensity of a man trying to claw his way out of a pit. He was emaciated, broke, and spiritually bankrupt. Every morning he woke up with a knot of dread in his stomach, forcing himself to walk to the municipal offices to beg for interviews that ended in closed doors. His actions were saturated with the vibration of not yet. One evening, after being publicly humiliated by a committee chairman who threw his blueprints into the trash, Victor collapsed on a bench in the municipal park, weeping tears of pure exhaustion. He looked at his shaking hands and realized the profound truth of his misery. He was trying to force a door that was locked from the inside because he was knocking from the consciousness of an outcast. That night, Victor stopped all strategic plotting. He threw his networking address books into the stove. He sat in his quiet study, closed his eyes, and decided to experiment with a radical shift. He abandoned the struggle entirely. He spent 3 days in deep, immersive imagination, assuming the absolute reality of already having completed the library, feeling the satisfaction of the finished structure, walking through its sunlit halls in his mind until it felt like a memory. The anxiety dissolved, replaced by a strange, unshakable calm. On the 4th morning, he woke up with an inexplicable, bizarre impulse. He felt a strong, joyful pull to take his sketchbook and walk down to an old, dilapidated cafe on the opposite side of the Danubia district he had not visited in years and had no professional reason to enter. His logical, calculating mind whispered, "This is a waste of time. You should be at the municipal office knocking on doors." But the calm certainty of his new state overrode the old anxiety. He followed the impulse. At the cafe, sitting alone in a corner booth, was an elderly civil engineer whom Victor had met once briefly 5 years prior at a minor funeral. The old man was staring blankly out the window, sketching architectural notes on a napkin. Victor walked over, not with the desperate hustle of a supplicant, but with the relaxed, warm confidence of a man who already had his life secure. He smiled and said, "Good morning, master. The light here looks rather inspiring today." The old engineer looked up, his eyes widening in sudden recognition. "Victor, my God, I have been trying to find you for a week. The municipal committee just had a sudden vacancy on the primary design board, and they need a visionary mind immediately. I was just trying to remember your name to call you." Within 2 weeks, Victor was awarded the commission. The entire project unfolded with an effortless, breathless inevitability that made his 2 years of frantic hustle look like a child playing in the dirt. He had not forced the door. He had simply walked through the one that opened when his state changed. Examine your own daily movements. As you look at the tasks, communications, and projects awaiting you today, ask yourself the defining question. Is this action born from the heavy, suffocating anxiety of lack, or is it an effortless response to inner guidance? If you feel the familiar strain of forcing the mental override of your fatigue, the desperate calculation of outcomes, stop. Do not push the boulder another inch up the mountain. Take a deep breath. Return to the quiet sanctuary of your assumption. Feel the wish fulfilled until your nervous system calms, and wait for the subtle, distinct whisper of inspiration. When the true impulse arrives, it will carry no panic. It will feel light, clear, and undeniably right. Follow that whisper and let the universe carry the weight of the result. If this distinction between forcing and flowing has brought a profound sense of liberation to your spirit, pause here. Let the breath settle deep into your ribs. If this work has illuminated your path, take a moment to subscribe and ensure you continue this journey of mastery. As you step across this threshold, a deeper mystery awaits us. Once the seed is planted and the inspired action is taken, there follows a silent testing interval where the visible world offers no proof of life. Turn the page and let us enter the sacred shadows of the Sabbath interval. The winter landscape outside the window is rendered in stark, monochrome shades of charcoal and slate. The ground is locked beneath a thick, unyielding crust of frozen earth, silent and dead to all outward appearance. A man stands at the farmhouse window, looking out over his newly sown fields where, just days before, he buried his precious winter wheat beneath the frost. The visible world offers no comfort. There is no green shoot, no rustle of leaves, no sign of life whatsoever. Only an empty, wind-swept desert of cold mud and gray sky. Step closer to him and observe the subtle corrosive erosion taking place within his mind. The initial enthusiasm of planting has faded, replaced by the gnawing, hollow ache of doubt. Days bleed into weeks, and the soil remains stubbornly barren. The impatient ego begins its quiet, venomous whispering, "Look out there, nothing is happening. You wasted your seed. You were a fool to believe it would grow. Go out there with a shovel and check on it. Dig it up and make sure it is actually transforming." This is the psychological reality of the Sabbath interval, the silent, suspended space between the planting of an assumption and the harvest of physical manifestation. It is the most perilous and demanding phase of the human journey. In this dark valley, the visible world acts as a false witness against your unseen creation. Every bill that remains unpaid, every door that has not yet opened, and every hour of silence from the outer world is presented by the ego as absolute proof of failure. Most human beings fail not because their assumption was false, but because they lack the sovereign fortitude to endure the silence of the Sabbath. They panic, dig up the seed with their own impatient hands, and murder the miracle in its dark womb. To survive and master the Sabbath interval, one must undergo a radical philosophical realignment regarding the nature of time and invisible growth. Why does the human mind experience such agonizing anxiety during periods of invisible progress? Because the ego is tethered exclusively to sensory feedback. It believes that seeing is believing, and that if an event has not yet materialized in the physical three-dimensional theater, it does not exist. The ego cannot comprehend the biological and metaphysical law of gestation. It treats creation like a vending machine. You insert the coin of an assumption, and if the product does not drop immediately into the tray, the machine is broken. How does the mechanism of invisible orchestration actually operate beneath the threshold of sensory awareness? The moment you genuinely assume a state in consciousness, an intricate, colossal chain reaction begins in the unseen matrix of reality. Consciousness initiates the alignment of events, the preparation of human hearts, the shifting of economic tides, and the convergence of circumstances from distances and directions your physical eyes cannot measure. None of this can happen on the surface while it is taking root in the dark. Why is this interval likened to a pregnancy? Think of a mother who has conceived a child. For months, outwardly, her life continues much as before. To casual observers, nothing has changed. Yet, within the warm, sacred darkness of her womb, the most complex, miraculous architecture of human life is being constructed cell by cell. To suggest that nothing is happening simply because the child is not yet visible is an absurdity. Everything is happening. The silence of the Sabbath is not a void of absence. It is the fullness of gestation. Why must the conscious mind resist the seduction of realism during this time? Because what the world calls realism is merely worship of past effects. When you return to the old state of lack under the guise of being realistic or practical, you cancel the creative order you gave to the universe. Your sole assignment during the Sabbath is not to manufacture visible evidence ahead of its natural timing, but to maintain absolute, unwavering fidelity to the unseen state. You must learn to rest in the dark, knowing that the dark is not a grave but a womb. In the autumn of 1888, a quiet, visionary horticulturist named Henry faced the ultimate test of agricultural and spiritual faith. He had imported a rare, highly sensitive species of alpine orchid root from the high peaks of the Himalayas, a plant known for its breathtaking celestial blooms, but equally notorious for its brutal gestation period. Henry planted the root in a deep, insulated, cold frame in his greenhouse, watered it precisely as the ancient text prescribed, and sealed the glass lids. And then the long silence began. Weeks passed into months. By midwinter, the soil in the box looked like dry, dead dust. There was no green shoot, no condensation on the glass, no microscopic tremor of life. The village gardeners mocked him, peering over his fence and shaking their heads. "Henry, your root is rotting in the dark," they warned. "Open the box, throw out the dirt, and plant something hardy like cabbage before spring arrives. You are chasing a ghost." Doubt crept into Henry's mind like a cold fog. On a freezing night in January, tormented by the whispers of practicality, he took a heavy garden trowel, walked out to the greenhouse, and stood over the cold frame with his hand trembling on the latch. The ego whispered, "Just poke an inch into the soil. Just check to see if there's a rootlet. You have a right to know if your labor was in vain." At that exact moment, Henry froze. He remembered the cardinal rule of his master teacher. He who disturbs the soil to check on the seed does not trust the life within it. With a shudder, Henry dropped the trowel, stepped back from the box, and locked the greenhouse door. He refused to look at the bed for 2 full months. He walked past it every day, and whenever doubt hissed in his ear, he quietly reaffirmed his assumption: the bloom is real. It is forming in the dark. On the first warm morning of April, as the morning sun struck the glass roof of the greenhouse, Henry walked inside and stopped dead in his tracks. The soil had split open overnight. Thrusting upward through the dark earth was a thick, vibrant emerald stalk, crowned by a cluster of buds so radiant and complex they looked like carved jewels. Within 48 hours, the orchid burst into full flower, filling the entire room with a fragrance so sublime that people traveled for miles just to witness it. The plant had not been dying in the dark. It had been building the root system necessary to support a magnificent harvest. Had Henry dug it up on that cold January night, he would have killed the very miracle he prayed for, all out of an impatient desire for premature proof. Examine the silent, waiting areas of your own life right now. Where are you currently standing before a closed glass box, watching a patch of winter earth, and listening to the impatient voice of doubt whisper that your labor has failed? If you are in the Sabbath interval, if you have assumed your state, surrendered the how, and followed your inspired action, yet the physical world remains stubbornly silent, do not pick up the trowel. Do not dig up your seed to check its pulse. Take a deep breath and settle into the profound rest of the Sabbath. Recognize that the silence of the outer world is not evidence of absence. It is the sound of the universe working on a scale too vast for your local eyes to perceive. If this realization brings a stabilizing anchor to your restless spirit, pause right here. Let the silence become your sanctuary. If this deep work has brought peace to your journey, consider subscribing to ensure you walk protected through every phase of the transformation. As we cross the threshold of the Sabbath, a luminous clarity dawns on the other side. We are led directly into the delicate, perfect balance between absolute surrender and unshakable certainty. Turn the page and let us master the luminous equilibrium. The helm of a deep-sea clipper ship cuts through the dark, mountainous swells of the mid-Atlantic at midnight. Overhead, the stars are blotted out by a dense curtain of maritime fog, leaving the crew with no visible horizon to guide their passage. On the quarterdeck stands the veteran captain. With one hand, he holds the spokes of the heavy wooden steering wheel completely loose, allowing the ship to yield dynamically to the immense, rolling pressure of the ocean swells. Yet, with his other hand, his grip on the binnacle compass is absolute, ironclad, and unshakable. Observe the profound paradox of his posture. He has surrendered absolute control over every individual wave, every gust of wind, and every foam crest that strikes the hull. He does not fight the water. He does not attempt to manually push the massive vessel against the tide. Yet, his internal certainty regarding his ultimate destination, his absolute knowing of the compass heading, does not waver by a single microdegree. To the untrained eye on the deck, this looks like a contradiction. How can a man simultaneously let go of the steering mechanics while maintaining an unshakable certainty of outcome? This is the exact psychological and spiritual state required for mastery, the luminous equilibrium. Most human beings are trapped on the pendulum swinging extremes. Either they grip the wheel with white-knuckled terror, trying to orchestrate every wave through sheer exhaustion, or they collapse into passive resignation, abandoning all direction and drifting wherever the current spits them out. They do not understand that true power lies in the razor-thin luminous edge where surrender of the method marries absolute certainty of the end. To master this delicate equilibrium, one must dissect the psychological mechanics of control and release. Why does the human mind struggle so violently with the coexistence of surrender and certainty? Because the ego operates entirely through false dichotomies. It reasons that if you are not actively fighting, plotting, and managing every physical detail, you must be doing nothing at all. It treats control as a binary switch. Either you are holding the steering wheel of the universe, or you have crashed into the rocks of helplessness. How do we resolve this false dichotomy through recursive thinking? Ask yourself, what is control actually controlling? When you attempt to manage the how, the timing, the specific sequence of events, the individual people, and the physical pathways through which your desire manifests, you are trying to orchestrate 10,000 variables with a brain designed to process only a handful at a time. You do not have the range of vision required to manage the physical universe. Therefore, surrendering control is not an act of weakness, it is an act of supreme intellectual and spiritual humility. It is the conscious acknowledgement that your local mind cannot map the infinite grid of reality. How, then, do we maintain certainty without controlling the route? By shifting your certainty from the means to the end. You do not need to know how the mountain will be crossed. You only need to know that you are already on the other side. Imagine a master archer drawing a bowstring in the stillness of dawn. He pulls the arrow back with absolute strength, aims with absolute precision toward the distant target, and then at the exact fraction of a second he releases his fingers entirely from the shaft. He does not chase the arrow downrange. He does not try to manually steer it around wind gusts mid-flight. He surrenders the arrow to the physics of the bow, the tension of the air, and the law of ballistics, resting in the absolute unshakable certainty that because his aim was true and his release was clean, the arrow will strike the bullseye. That precise luminous equilibrium between aiming with absolute conviction and releasing the flight to the universe is the engine of all true manifestation. In the summer of 1912, during the treacherous trans-Pacific solo navigation trials, an eccentric American mariner named Captain Silas set sail from San Francisco toward the distant shores of Yokohama in a fragile 30-foot wooden sloop. The voyage was legendary for its brutal typhoons and shifting, unpredictable oceanic currents. Most captains who attempted the crossing relied on frantic calculations, constant sail adjustments, and day and night steering marathons that drove them to the brink of delirium within a fortnight. Silas approached the journey with a radically different philosophy. On the third day out, after navigating past the Golden Gate into the open, roaring expanse of the Pacific, he locked the ship's rudder into a fixed, calculated magnetic heading, lashed the wheel securely in place, walked down to his cabin, lay down in his bunk, and went to sleep. For 20 consecutive days, Silas did not touch the steering wheel. He cooked his meals, read ancient philosophy, and slept through howling gales and towering seas. When the sloop was battered by cross currents, the hull groaned, the mast whipped back and forth, and the vessel was frequently thrown off its exact line by miles of churning foam. Passing merchant vessels spotted the unmanned sloop, drifting wildly through the storm tracks, and signaled frantically, assuming the captain had died or gone mad. They could not comprehend how a man could leave a vessel entirely unattended in the middle of a tempest. Yet, Silas remained entirely at peace in his cabin. He understood a secret of maritime dynamics that his frantic peers had missed. The ocean currents, combined with the fixed set of the rudder and the natural trim of the hull, possessed an inherent self-correcting intelligence. If a wave knocked the ship 10 degrees off course to the north, the water pressure on the biased hull and locked rudder would automatically force it back south the moment the swell passed. The ship wanted to reach Yokohama. Its design was inherently oriented toward the destination. By constantly grabbing the wheel and trying to manually correct every wave, other captains were actually fighting the ship's natural self-correcting architecture and driving themselves into exhaustion. On the 42nd day, Silas's sloop glided smoothly past the breakwater into Yokohama harbor, docking precisely at the designated pier. His logbook revealed that while he had slept through storms and surrendered every hour of physical steering, his vessel had traveled a truer, cleaner line than any ship piloted by a frantic captain that season. He had achieved the luminous equilibrium, total surrender of the route, absolute certainty of the destination. Examine the way you are currently handling the voyage of your own life. Where are your hands blistered from white-knuckling the steering wheel of circumstances you cannot possibly control? Where are you lying awake at night, trying to manually correct every wave, every delay, and every unexpected cross-current? Take a deep breath, lock your rudder to your assumption. Acknowledge your ultimate destination with absolute unshakable certainty, and then let go of the wheel. Surrender the routing, the timing, the sequence, and the specific people. If this realization brings a profound, anchoring sense of equilibrium to your soul, pause here. Let the white knuckles relax. If this work has brought clarity to your journey, consider subscribing to ensure you remain steady through every storm. As you step across this threshold, the waters grow calm, and a strange, breathtaking phenomenon begins to manifest on the horizon. The world around you stops feeling like a battlefield and starts acting like a mirror of synchronicities. Turn the page, and let us witness the anatomy of synchronicity. The rain has cleared, leaving the cobblestones of the old European quarter slick and gleaming under the pale amber glow of late afternoon street lamps. A man walks down the narrow alleyway with an unhurried, rhythmic gait. His shoulders are dropped, his breathing is deep and steady, and an ambient, quiet confidence radiates from his entire presence. Just hours before, his life was a tangled knot of dead ends and unanswered emails. Yet tonight, as he turns the corner, a series of seemingly impossible coincidences begins to unfold with the precision of clockwork choreography. First, a caf door opens ahead of him, and out steps an old acquaintance he has not seen in a decade, precisely the person who holds the exact contact he needs for his next creative venture. Second, as he reaches the end of the block, a messenger hands him a misplaced letter containing a resolution to a financial problem that had vexed him for months. Third, the traffic light turns green the exact millisecond his foot touches the curb, allowing him to glide across the avenue without breaking his stride. Observe the quality of these events. To an outside observer, they look like a miraculous run of sheer luck. But to the man walking the pavement, they do not feel like random accidents at all. They feel like notes in a prearranged symphony. This is the transition point where struggle transforms into synchronicity. When an individual stops fighting the river of existence and aligns with the internal state of fulfillment, the outer world undergoes a profound metamorphosis. Doors that were rusted shut for years swing open at a whisper. The right people appear at the exact minute of readiness. Resources materialize from channels that logic could never have mapped. The universe stops acting like a hostile obstacle course and begins operating as an exquisite, responsive mirror of consciousness. To understand how synchronicities are engineered by the unseen machinery of reality, we must journey beyond the superficial mechanics of luck and examine the deep philosophy of resonance. Why do synchronicities appear so rare to the struggling ego, yet so abundant to the master of consciousness? Because synchronicity is not a violation of natural laws, it is the natural law of consciousness expressing itself through physical form. The ego perceives reality as a collection of isolated, disconnected objects and separate people moving randomly across a cold space. In this fragmented worldview, an alignment of events requires immense physical manipulation, phone calls, contracts, negotiations, and brute force persuasion. How does consciousness dissolve this fragmentation through the bridge of incidence? When you assume a state of reality in your imagination and maintain it without interference, you establish an electromagnetic and psychological resonance. Consciousness, which is the singular substance underlying all phenomena, begins to orchestrate the 10,000 variables required to externalize your assumption. It shifts the perceptions of people who have never met you, subtly altering their thoughts and inclinations so that they walk toward your path. It rearranges economic tides, unblocks stagnant channels, and times events with breathtaking mathematical precision. Why do these occurrences feel uncanny and miraculous to our limited understanding? Because your conscious mind sees only the local surface of reality, blind to the subterranean roots connecting all things. When a resource arrives from an unexpected direction, your ego calls it a coincidence. But there are no coincidences in a universe governed by consciousness. Synchronicity is simply the signature of Source at work, the unmistakable proof that when you get out of your own way, reality reorganizes itself around your state with the effortless grace of a reflection following the movements of a face in the glass. In the autumn of 1934, during the darkest depths of the Great Depression, a brilliant acoustic engineer named Arthur found himself stripped of his laboratory, his funding, and his patents. For 6 months, he had fought tooth and nail to secure a backer for his revolutionary sound recording technology. He wrote hundreds of letters, knocked on every corporate door in New York City, and exhausted his savings on train fare and cheap suits. Every door was slammed in his face. He was broken, and ready to walk away. One November evening, exhausted by a day of fruitless rejection, Arthur sat on a wooden bench in Central Park, watching the fallen leaves drift across the gray asphalt. He realized the bitter truth of his exhaustion. He was trying to force a city of millions to listen to a song they were not tuned to receive because he was broadcasting the frequency of absolute lack. Arthur closed his eyes. He abandoned the strategy folders in his briefcase. For 30 minutes, sitting right there on the park bench, he mentally dissolved his desperation. He imagined the laboratory already built, the equipment functioning perfectly, the sense of quiet triumph settling deep into his bones. He inhabited the state of the wish fulfilled so completely that when he opened his eyes, the park looked different, brighter, sharper, more real than the cold physical reality around him. He felt an overwhelming, quiet certainty that it was done. He stood up, left his briefcase of job applications on the park bench, abandoning his old weapons entirely, and began walking aimlessly toward uptown, following a strange, gentle internal pull that told him to turn down a quiet side street he had never visited. As he walked past an old brownstone church, a sudden gust of wind blew a loose newspaper page across the pavement, wrapping it around his ankles. Arthur reached down to pick it up and uncrumple it. His eyes caught a small classified notice near the bottom margin. It was a 3-week-old advertisement placed by a retired shipping tycoon living in the brownstone across the street, seeking a technical consultant to design a private acoustic communication system for his personal maritime library. Arthur walked across the street, rang the brass bell, and was greeted by the tycoon himself, who opened the door and stared at him in astonishment. "Good God, young man," the tycoon said. "I just spent the last hour praying that someone with your exact engineering background would walk past my door. My regular consultants all gave up yesterday." Within 48 hours, the contract was signed, the laboratory was funded, and Arthur's career was launched into global prominence. He had not forced the door. He had simply walked down the street that the universe paved for him the moment he changed his state. Examine your own life today. Where have you been dismissing miraculous alignments as mere coincidences? Where are the doors opening effortlessly before you, yet you hesitate to walk through them because they did not originate from your exhausting conscious plan? Take a deep breath and open your eyes to the synchronicities unfolding around you right now. Recognize them for what they truly are, the whispers of Source, laying down the gold-paved road of your bridge of incidents. Stop fighting the river. Notice how the current carries you precisely where you belong when you surrender the need to steer every drop of water. If this recognition of synchronicity brings a deep sense of wonder and alignment to your spirit, pause right here. Let the magic of the unseen settle into your awareness. If this work has awakened your perception, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to ensure you continue walking this path of conscious mastery. As we step across this threshold, we reach the ultimate summit of our journey. Ahead lies the dawn of a completely transformed way of being, the complete integration of surrender, assumption, and infinite power. Turn the page and let us step into Chapter 10, Waking Up Whole. The first pale streak of dawn cuts across the eastern horizon, painting the sleeping world in washes of liquid gold and amethyst. The night's heavy frost melts slowly from the window panes, transforming into bright, trembling droplets that catch the morning light. A man stands on the threshold of his home, looking out over the valley where the mist rises gently from the greening earth. His hands are empty of ledgers, maps, and weapons of forced struggle. His shoulders are relaxed, his breathing is deep and rhythmic, and his eyes reflect the rising sun with the calm, unshakable clarity of someone who has finally remembered who he is. For years, he was a stranger to his own existence, a weary, bloodied warrior fighting battles against unlocked doors, pushing rivers that flowed freely on their own, and carrying the crushing weight of a universe that never asked him to bear its burdens. But tonight, that exhaustion has dissolved into the profound, luminous relief of a soul returning home. Observe him closely as he takes his first step across the threshold into the new day. He does not rush. He does not calculate odds or draft frantic strategies. He steps forward with the quiet, majestic certainty of one who knows that the ground beneath his feet is supported by an infinite intelligence, and that every desire living in his heart is a sacred blueprint already guaranteed by the architecture of reality. This is the ultimate destination of our journey, not a technique, not a temporary hack, but a complete, irreversible transformation in the way a human being inhabits consciousness. Waking up whole means laying down the heavy armor of the struggling ego and stepping into the sovereign freedom of the true I am. To integrate this ultimate realization, we must examine the philosophical and psychological anatomy of wholeness. What does it truly mean to wake up whole from the dream of soul exhaustion? It means realizing that the division between the seeker and the sought, between the dreamer and the dream, between human will and divine intelligence, was always an illusion. The ego loves division. It carves the universe into hostile territories of me and not me, forcing you to fight for every breath, every crumb of love, and every inch of success. Wholeness is the direct perception that you are not an isolated creature tossed about by a capricious physical world, but the very consciousness through which worlds are conceived, sustained, and dissolved. How does recursive thinking illuminate the mechanics of this transformation? Ask yourself, why do we suffer the illusion of separation in the first place? Because consciousness, in its infinite desire to experience its own boundless nature, plunges into the localized dream of limitation so that it may experience the exquisite joy of waking up. The struggle, the exhaustion, the locked doors, and the dark nights of the Sabbath were never punishments. They were the friction necessary to burn away the false identity of the frantic architect, leaving behind only the pure, radiant gold of the conscious receiver. How does this manifest in daily life once the awakening is complete? When you wake up whole, your relationship with time, desire, and action changes forever. You no longer live in the anxious anticipation of a future that must be conquered, nor in the regret of a past that must be repaired. You inhabit the eternal now. You plant your desires in the sacred soil of assumption with absolute joyful conviction. You surrender the how with the deep humility of one who trusts the master guide within. You take inspired action not from the desperation of lack, but from the calm, effortless certainty of already having. And you walk through the world as a living demonstration of the greatest truth ever whispered to the human soul. You were never meant to carry this alone. In the late autumn of his life, after decades of traveling the globe, writing timeless masterworks, and mentoring thousands of seekers through the labyrinth of human striving, the legendary teacher Hermes stood before an assembly of disciples in a quiet courtyard in Alexandria. The courtyard was filled with brilliant scholars, passionate philosophers, and exhausted travelers who had walked hundreds of miles across the desert, clutching scrolls, demanding formulas, and begging for the ultimate secret of manifestation. They wanted six-step systems, tactical blueprints, and fail-safe techniques to conquer their enemies, multiply their wealth, and force the world to bow to their will. Hermes listened to their frantic questions in silence. He did not pick up a scroll. He did not draw a diagram in the sand. Instead, he walked slowly to the center of the courtyard, where an ancient olive tree stood rooted in the stone pavement, its branches heavy with dark, ripe fruit. He placed his open palm flat against the rough gray bark of the trunk, closed his eyes, and stood perfectly still for 10 full minutes. The assembly fell into a breathless, expectant hush. When Hermes finally opened his eyes, he looked around at the anxious faces of the crowd and smiled a gentle, timeless smile. "My children," Hermes said softly, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent stone walls. "For 40 years you have asked me for the secret of the universe. And for 40 years I have given you maps, parables, and methods, hoping you would eventually see what is standing right in front of your eyes." He pointed his finger toward the olive tree. "Look at this tree. Does it sweat? Does it draft strategies in the dark? Does it lie awake at night, terrified that the sun will forget to rise, or that the soil will refuse to nourish its roots? Does it send its branches out into the sky with frantic hustle, trying to force the wind to blow in its direction?" The crowd stood in absolute stunned silence. "No," Hermes continued, his voice ringing with majestic clarity. "The tree simply is. It assumes its nature in the quiet dark of the earth. It trusts the infinite intelligence that animates the sap within its veins, and it lifts its leaves to the sun with effortless grace. It bears fruit, not because it struggles, but because it does not interfere with the life that lives it." Hermes lowered his hand from the bark, stepped back, and looked deeply into the eyes of every seeker gathered in the courtyard. "Tonight, your journey of struggle ends. Stop fighting the tree. Stop digging up the roots. Assume your desire in the sanctuary of your consciousness. Surrender the how to the infinite intelligence that sculpted the stars, and walk forward into your life as one who knows that it is already done. Go in peace. You are home." We have reached the final threshold of our cinematic manuscript. The lessons of the journey are complete, but the true work, the living embodiment of these truths, begins the moment you close these pages and step back into the rushing current of your daily life. Right now, in this sacred stillness before you sleep or as you rise to meet the dawn, make your final choice. You can return to the old, exhausting architecture of striving, plotting, forcing, and bearing the crushing weight of a world that was never meant to rest on your shoulders alone. Or you can choose the path of mastery. Assume your desire tonight with your full imagination and your full feeling. Give it the vibrant, living texture of reality. Surrender the how with profound, unshakable trust. Listen for the quiet whisper of inspired action and follow the ease when it arrives. If this journey has transformed your understanding, awakened your spirit, and offered you the relief of putting down a weight you never needed to carry, pause here. Take one final, deep breath, hit the like button to seal this intention, and subscribe to remain anchored on the path of conscious mastery. As you step forward into tomorrow, walk as one who no longer hopes, no longer guesses, but knows. The universe is not a fortress to be conquered, it is a mirror waiting for your reflection. May you rest in the divine certainty that your desire is already a living reality, and may you wake every day as one who knows that Source is already leading you home.